So today we come to the Paṭṭhāna, or the method of conditional relations. Now, Paṭṭhāna, or conditional relations, are taught in the 7th and last book of Abhidhamma, which is called Paṭṭhāna. Now, Abhidhamma was believed by Theravada Buddhists to have taught to the celestial beings in the realm of Tawatingsa. And then Buddha taught, or Buddha informed the Venerable Sariputra what he had taught every day, and then Venerable Sariputra brought that teaching to the human world and taught his 500 disciples. And what Abhidhamma we have now is the one formulated by the Venerable Sariputra. So there are 7 books in Abhidhamma, and Paṭṭhāna is the last book. Now, during the 4th week after his enlightenment, Buddha sat in a house called Jewel House, not because it was decorated with jewel, but because he contemplated on the jewel of Dhamma, which is Abhidhamma, in that house, and so that house is called a jewel house. So Buddha sat in that jewel house for 7 days and contemplated on Abhidhamma. When Buddha contemplated the first 6 books of Abhidhamma, nothing special happened. But when Buddha contemplated on the 7th book of Abhidhamma, Paṭṭhāna, it is said that 6 colored rays came out from his body and covered the whole world. And that was because for the super wisdom of the Buddha, the first 6 books were not deep enough. Although these books are very difficult for us, but for the omniscience of the Buddha, they were not deep enough. So Buddha's omniscience or Buddha wisdom did not get enough room to move about in these books, and so his mind was not so happy. So his mind was like a whale put in a small tank. The whale which is put in a small tank could not move about freely. So in the same way, his wisdom was so great that it was not deep enough for his wisdom to move about. But when he reached the 7th book, the 7th book of Paṭṭhāna is like an ocean. It is both great and profound. Since it is profound and great, Buddha's wisdom gained room in the teaching of Paṭṭhāna, and so it was like the same whale released in the ocean. So when he could go into Paṭṭhāna in every way he liked, his mind became clear, his mind became happy. And so when the mind is happy and clear, the heart, which is the base of the mind, also became clear. And when the heart became clear, the other material properties in the body of the Buddha also became clear, and so they emitted rays of 6 kinds from the body. So Paṭṭhāna is both profound and great. Even in the very abbreviated form, it comprises 2,643 pages in the 6th Buddhist Council edition. But that edition contains many omissions, many that are to be repeated are omitted from the texts, and so it is said that if all the omissions were to be put back, if the Paṭṭhāna were to be printed with all the omissions put back, it would need 30 million books of 400 pages each. So it is very great, very wide, and also it is very deep, profound and difficult to understand. So difficult to understand as it is, we have to understand it. We have to do something to understand. So today we will try to understand the 24 conditions or 24 modes of relationships taught in Paṭṭhāna. When we understand these 24 conditions, then we will be able to go into the Paṭṭhāna book itself. So these 24 conditions are called Paccaya in Pali. Now you have met the word Paccaya in the doctrine of dependent origination. Paccaya is translated as condition here, and it is defined in the commentaries as when a state is indispensable to another state's presence or arising, the former is a condition for the latter. If a state is indispensable to another state's presence or arising, now arising and presence, that means arising and then existing. So when a state is indispensable for another state to arise and also to go on existing, then that state is called the condition for the later state that arises and continues existing. So that is called a condition or paccaya. And also it is said that any given state that assists the presence or arising of a given state is called the latter's condition. So any state that assists the presence or arising of a given state is called a condition. So a condition means something that assists in another state to arise or to go on existing. Sometimes condition may be a producing cause. At other times it is the assisting factor or assisting state. It assists or it supports the other state to arise and to continue existing. There are 24 of them, and I want you to be familiar with both Pali and the English translation. First, just let us go through the names. Number 1, Hetu, that means the root. That means the root condition. I hope you are familiar with the word root, or the Pali word Hetu. In the 3rd chapter, you learned that there were 6 Hetus, or 6 roots. And what are those 6 roots? Loba, dosa, moha, aloba, adosa, amoha. Attachment, ill will, delusion, and non-attachment, non-ill will, and non-delusion. So these 6 are called hetus. And the hetu is explained as something like a root. The root helps the tree to be strong and to gain strength. In the same way, these factors or these mental states assist the associated mental states to gain strength or to endure. So it is like a root assisting the tree to stand stable and to gain strength. Now, when we study Paṭṭhāna, we need to know 3 things. That is, the condition or conditioning state, and then conditioned state, and the force of condition, or the power of condition. So these 3 we must understand regarding every one of these 24 modes of relations. The 6 roots are called the conditioning states. They condition the associated states. That means they help the associated states to endure, to gain strength, and to be stable. And the conditioned states are those that are associated with these 6 roots. How many chetas are associated with these roots? There are 89 types of consciousness, and among those there are types of consciousness that are associated with roots, and also there are those that are not associated with roots. 18 are not associated with roots. They are called rootless consciousness. So regarding this relation, regarding this condition, we don't have to worry about the rootless consciousness. So the other 71 chetas and chetasikas going along with it, and also material property produced by this cheta. So they are called the conditioned states of roots, or they are called conditionally produced or conditionally arisen states. And the conditioning force, or the force of condition, is a particular way in which the conditioning states function as conditions for the conditioned state. So that is some power or some force that the roots possess, and by way of being roots, they support their associated states. So with regard to the hetu or root condition, we need to understand which are the conditioning states and which are the conditioned states, and which is the force of the condition. Now, force of condition and conditioning states are said to be not different. Now, let us take loba. What is loba? Loba is an attachment. So attachment is loba, and firm attachment to associated states is what we call the force of the condition. So actually the force of condition and the condition itself are the same. So now, with regard to the first condition, hetu, the conditioning states are the 6 hetus, and conditioned states are those that are associated with hetus. So Hetus are mental factors, and so they are associated with, or they arise simultaneously with types of consciousness. So there are 71 types of consciousness that are associated with roots. And also, if you remember the 6th chapter, there are material properties that are produced by consciousness or by mind. So at one given moment, there is a root or a hetu, and then the consciousness concomitant with that hetu, and then mental factors going along with that consciousness, and also the material properties that are produced by that consciousness. Now, hetus act as conditioning states, and the others are called conditioned states. If we take lobha as conditioning state, then the citta accompanied by lobha and the cetasikas going along with it and the material properties caused by it are called conditioned states. States that are conditioned, or states that are conditionally arisen. And they are related as root and a trunk or something like that. The second is aramana, object condition. There is nothing that is not an object in the world. So object consists of all four ultimate realities, all cetas, all cetasikas, all rupas, and nibbana. And they act as conditioning states for the types of consciousness that take them as object. Now suppose we see something. That something is an object. Here, let us say a rose. So we see a rose. So the rose is an object. It is rupa or matter. And there is a seeing consciousness in my mind. Now that seeing consciousness takes that rose as object. So the rose is the conditioning state for the consciousness that arises in my mind. Consciousness and also the concomitant mental factors. And objects are called aramana in Pali because they are like the places where one delights in. Now, a beautiful garden, a park, you go for pleasure. So in the same way, the objects are taken by the consciousness as a place for pleasure, and so they are called aramana in Pali. And also they are said to be like a staff or like a line of rope. Now, when you are weak, when you cannot walk properly, you have to take the help of a staff. So leaning on the staff, you walk, or holding on to the line, you walk. So in the same way, leaning on the object or holding on to the object, mind arises, or citta and cetasika arise. So, because they are those that are held on, they are called alambana in Pali, and so we have these two words in Pali, aramana and alambana. They are merged together and we just call them aramana. So the object condition, the conditioning state of object condition consists of all things in the world, all cetas, cetasikas, rupas and nibbana. And the conditioned states are those that take those as objects. So conditioned states are the consciousness and mental factors. Now, we will come to detail later. Now, number 3 is adhipati. Now, you are familiar with the word adhipati. You have met adhipati in the 7th chapter, and there are 4 adhipatis, 4 predominant factors. And those predominant factors are called adhipati or predominance here. And those that are associated with these predominant factors, and also the material states that are produced by these factors, are called the conditioned states of predominance. So predominance means it is like a king. He has the sole authority in all the fields, and so it is called adhipati. Sometimes chanda or will to do is predominant. Sometimes consciousness itself is predominant. Sometimes effort or virya is predominant. Sometimes investigation or understanding is predominant. And so when one of them is predominant, then it is called a predominant condition, or the conditioning state of predominant condition. And then those that are concomitant with that predominance are called the conditioned states of predominant. So sometimes we have very strong desire to do something. So when we have very strong desire, let's say we have very strong desire to do some meritorious deed, then the chanda or the will to do is acting as a predominant factor. So along with it, the other predominant factors will arise, but at one time only one is predominant and the others are subordinate to that predominant factor. Number 4 is anantara, proximity. Anantara is composed of an and antara. Antara means gap. So anantara means no gap. Anantara condition is something like vacating your place so that another person can sit in your place. So by disappearing, one conditions another to come or to arise. So that is called anantara condition or proximity condition. So anantara condition, there must be no gap between the preceding and succeeding. The anantara condition can be obtained only in the chittas or consciousness. Now, you may remember a diagram of the thought process. So, a thought process normally contains how many thought moments? 17 thought moments. So, let's say number 1 thought moment, and then number 2 thought moment, number 3 thought moment, and so on. Now, although we teach thought process with that diagram, actually we are not to understand that at one moment there are 17 thought moments like in the diagram. At one moment there is only one type of consciousness. So that one type of consciousness arises and stays for a little time, and then it disappears. So immediately after the disappearance of number 1 consciousness, number 2 consciousness arises. If number 1 consciousness does not disappear, number 2 consciousness cannot arise, because there is only one space for them to arise. And if number 1 consciousness does not disappear, number 2 consciousness cannot arise. So the disappearing number 1 consciousness is said to be a proximity condition for number 2 consciousness to arise. In the same way, number 2 consciousness, when it disappears, is said to be a proximity condition for number 3, consciousness, and so on. So actually this is just vacating your place so that another can take your place. And then number 5, samanandara. It is actually the same as anandara. So number 4 and number 5 are actually the same. The only difference is there is SAM in number 5 and there is no SAM in number 4. Apart from that, there is no difference between these two. In English also, in order to make them two different conditions, one is translated as proximity and another as contiguity, but actually they are the same. Now, even in Abhidhamma, we find such things. That means, why teach samanandara here? If they are the same, anandara and samanandara are the same, why teach samanandara or why teach anandara? Just one would be enough. The answer here is, even in Abhidhamma, Buddha had to take into account the inner disposition of the minds of his listeners. Different people have different experience and different likes and dislikes. So one person may understand when he hears the word anandara, but another person may understand when he hears the word samanandara rather than anandara, and so on. So in order to suit the inner disposition of the listeners, Buddha used different names for one and the same thing. So here also anandara and samanandara are actually the same. So samanandara or contiguity condition is the same as anandara condition, so it is again giving place to another state to arise. So whenever there is anandara condition, there is samanandara condition too. So this can be seen in a thought process. So the preceding consciousness is a anandara condition and samanandara condition for the succeeding consciousness, and so on and so on. It goes on and on and on. And number 6 is saha jata. Saha means together. Jata means arisen. Arisen together, so arising together and existing together is saha jata. Together means the conditioning state and conditioned state arise together, exist together, and one supports the other or one assists the other. So that is called sahajata, coordinations. Now when a consciousness arises, it arises with some mental factors. So they arise together and so they are sahajata. Consciousness is a conditioning state for mental factors. And mental factors are also conditioned state for consciousness. We will come to that in number 7. So here, sahajata means arising and existing together, and one is the conditioning state and the other conditioned state. So when consciousness arises, it arises with mental factors, and so consciousness is a coordination condition for mental factors. So they are related as the sahajata, conditioning factor and conditioned factor. This can be obtained also between mental states and material states. For example, at the moment of rebirth, now there arise consciousness, mental factor, and also rupa born of karma. So consciousness is the conditioning state for the other two. And number 7 is anyamanya, one to the other, mutuality. One to the other means A is a conditioning state for B, and B is conditioning state for A. So this mutual support is called anyamanya condition or mutuality condition. This can be had between Citta and Cetasika and Cetasika and Citta, and also with some material properties. Again, let us take the first type of consciousness, the first one there, the akusala consciousness. So with that consciousness there are 19 mental factors. So when we take consciousness as conditioning state, then the mental factors are conditioned states. And then mental factors are conditioning state, and the consciousness is conditioned state. So they go back and forth, and so they are called mutuality condition. Number 8 is nisaya, support condition, dependence. Something you depend on, that something is called a nisaya. Again, citta and cetasika. So cetasikas arise only when citta arises. So citta serves as a conditioning state for cetasikas. Since there can be also the mutuality or reciprocity, cetasikas can be also conditioning states of support for consciousness. And number 9 is upanisaya, decisive support or strong support. So number 9 is more powerful than number 8. Actually number 9 is wider in scope than number 8. It's upanisaya, or decisive support or strong support. And number 10 is purejata, pre-nascence. Now that means the conditioning state arises before the conditioned state arises, and it is existing when the conditioned state arises. Suppose, let's take the eye. The sensitivities in the eye, they arise, say, before the seeing consciousness arises. And then seeing consciousness arises. So when seeing consciousness arises, the eyes are in existence. Eyes are existing at that time. So the eyes are the conditioning states of pre-nascence to the seeing consciousness. Or we can take the heart. So some types of consciousness depend on the heart. So the heart arises before the consciousness arises, and when the consciousness arises, the heart is still existing. So that kind of conditioning is called purejata, pre-nascence. That means arising before the conditioned state. And number 11 is paccājata. It is the opposite of purejata. Pacha means back or later. Here, the conditioning states arise after the conditioned state arises, and then it supports it. Our teachers taught us with similes or with examples. So here, for paccājata, one example is given. I don't know whether that is true or not. The vultures, it is said that vultures do not feed their young ones. And those young ones survive with just the expectation. They just have the expectation that their parents will bring something for them to eat. And that expectation sustains them until they can search food for themselves. So the expectation for food sustains their body. So their body arose first, and then the expectation arises later. So when expectation arises, their body is still in existence. So the expectation arises later, but when it itself is also existing, it supports the body of the vulture or something like those that have arisen before it. So it comes after what it is to support. And therefore it is the opposite of Purijata. Purijata is the conditioning state arises first, and then conditioned state arises later. But in Purijata, conditioning state arises after and conditioned state arises before. So they are two opposite ways of supporting. And number 12 is Asevana. Asevana is translated as repetition. That means doing it again and again. So by doing it again and again, you gain momentum. And this Asevana, since it is called repeating, it must be of the same kind. Now, it can be had only between mental states. In a thought process, jhanas run how many times? Jhanas run normally 7 times. So when jhanas run 7 times, that means jhavana repeats itself for 7 times. So first jhavana is a repetition condition for second jhavana, and second jhavana is a repetition condition for third jhavana, and so on. But this repetition condition can be had only between 2 things that belong to the same kind or same genus. So kusala to kusala, akusala to akusala, kiriya to kiriya, like that. So there are 7 thought jhavana movements. First jhavana is a repetition condition for second jhavana, and so on. So 6th jhavana is a repetition condition for 7th jhavana. But after 7th jhavana, there arises what is called registration. So registering consciousness. Registering consciousness is a resultant consciousness. So the akusala consciousness and resultant consciousness are different. They do not belong to the same kind. So the 7th jhavana is not a repetition condition for registering consciousness that follows it. So repetition condition can be had only between those that belong to the same kind. Now, in the thought process for enlightenment, there is one moment of path consciousness and 2 or 3 moments of fruition consciousness. There, path consciousness is not a repetition condition for fruition consciousness, because path consciousness belongs to wholesome chetas, and fruition consciousness belong to resultant consciousness. So they are of different kinds, and so they do not have this repetition condition. So only between those that belong to the same kind can there be repetition condition. Number 13 is karma condition, that you already know. Now there are two kinds of karma condition. One is called cognizance karma condition. That means same time karma condition, and the other is different time karma condition. Now, when the first citta of the lobha mula arises, the first one, it arises with 19 mental factors, and among the 19 there is cetana, and cetana is what is called karma. So that cetana is a karma condition for cognizance karma condition for the concomitant citta and mental factors, and that cetana will produce results in the future. So that cetana is also a karma condition for the resultant consciousness and material properties that will arise in the future. So cetana has two functions, let us say. It is a cognizance karma condition for the concomitant cettas and cetasikas, and also it is a different time karma condition for the resultant consciousness and material properties that will arise in the future. So please note that there are two kinds of karma, same time karma and different time karma. And number 14 is vipaka, result. Now result condition is peaceful condition. When something is a result of some other thing, it is inactive. It is just a result produced by the cause. So it has no activity. So it is inactivity or the peacefulness or something like that. And it imparts its peaceful nature to its concomitant cettas and cetasikas. And that is why it is called result condition. So result condition is itself is result, and it imparts its peaceful nature to the concomitant mental states. And number 15 is ahara, nutriment. You all know ahara. How many aharas are there? 4 aharas. So they are the ahara condition or nutriment condition for the concomitant cettas and cetasikas, and also the edible food nutriment is the nutriment condition for cognizant material properties. And number 16 is indriya, faculty. So there are 22 indriyas taught in the 7th chapter, and among them, except femininity and masculinity, the other 20 are called here indriya. So they have authority over their own or over their respective fields, and so they are called indriya. So they exercise authority over their concomitant cettas and cetasikas, and so they are called indriya. And also the material properties like eye sensitivity and so on. So eye sensitivity has the authority over seeing, and so it is also called indriya. So when a seeing consciousness arises, there is the eye or eye sensitivity, and there is something to be seen. So eye sensitivity, and then there is the seeing consciousness. So eye sensitivity is the faculty condition for the eye consciousness and so on. And then number 17 is Jana Conditions. Again, you have to find out how many jhanas are there. 7. Vitaka, Vichara, Piti, Somanasa, Domanasa, Ubeka. So these are called jhana. No, jhana means contemplating the object closely, taking the object with intensity, and so that they are called jhana. So they impart that quality of contemplating an object intensely on other concomitant states. And number 18 is magga, path condition. Path means a road, so road is some means of reaching a destination. So in the same way, the magga conditions are those that lead to good destination or bad destination. Now there are 12 factors of magga, and 8 are wholesome and indeterminate, and the 4 are unwholesome. So 4 unwholesome mega factors lead to rebirth in 4 woeful states, and the 8 wholesome factors of magga lead to rebirth in blissful states. Now when a magga consciousness arises, there arise also these 8 factors, beginning with right understanding and so on. So when we take right understanding as path condition, then the magga citta and its concomitants are said to be the conditioned states of path condition. So we can take any one of these 8 factors as conditioning state, and the remaining factors with consciousness as conditioned states. And also when an unwholesome consciousness arises, let us say the first citta, there is ditthi or wrong view. So that is miccha ditthi. So if we take that miccha ditthi as the path conditioning factor, conditioning state of path condition, then the citta and other concomitants are said to be the conditioned states of path condition. Number 19 is sampayutta, association. Now in Abhidhamma, sampayutta is used regarding mental states that have the same arising, the same disappearing, the same object and the same base. Even though the mental states and material states may arise together, they are not called associated. So this associated or Pali sampayutta is for mental states only. So one mental state can be associated with another mental state, but mental states are never said to be associated with material states. Because in order to be called associated, they must arise together. They must disappear together. They must have the same or common object, and they must have the same base. Again, the first type of consciousness, Lobha Mula consciousness, and it arises with 19 mental factors. So if we take the consciousness as the conditioning state, then the 19 Cetasikas are conditioned states. Or if we take one of the Cetasikas as conditioning state, then the consciousness and the other Cetasikas are called conditioned states, and so on. So the sampayutta or association condition can be obtained only in the mental states. Now, vimalajoti, dissociation. Vimalajoti is from mind and matter, or matter and mind, or mind to matter, or matter to mind. So mind and matter may arise at the same time, but they are not said to be sampayutta. So they are said to be vimalajoti, or dissociated. That means they do not mix with each other. Although they may arise together, they will not mix each other. Now, Biota Association is compared to the 4 sweet things that monks are allowed to take in the afternoon if they have some kind of disease that can be cured by that medicine. They are called 4 sweet things. So when you mix these 4 sweet things, they mix so thoroughly that you cannot differentiate one from the other. So Biota is like that. Cetas and Cetasikas are so associated that it is difficult to tell the difference between Ceta and Cetasika. They merge together so thoroughly that it is very difficult to differentiate them. Now, vimalajoti is compared to different tastes mixed together. So although you mix the different tastes, they remain separate. Hot taste is hot taste, and sweet taste is sweet taste. So they do not mix together, they do not blend together and become one. They are still, say, different tastes because they do not mix, although they may be together. So vimalajoti is like that. Although mind and matter may arise together at the same time, they are not called associated, but they are called dissociated. And then number 21 is ati, presence. That means it is present and it is existing when it is called the conditioning state. So when there is the presence condition, that means the conditioning state must be present at that time, and it is related to, or it supports the other, the conditionally arisen state by way of presence condition. We can take the same example, the first Ceta. The Ceta and Cetasikas arise, and so they are existing at the time, and so one is the presence condition for the other. And nati, absence. So absence condition is the same as number 4, anandara. Here nati means absence, nothing. So when it is absent, then the other can take its place. So it is obtained between Cetas following one after another. And vigata, disappearance, is the same as nati, absence. And avigata, non-disappearance, is the same as ati, presence. So here also the difference is only the names but not the real thing. So ati and avigata, or presence and non-disappearance, are the same, and absence and disappearance are the same. So these are the 24 Paṭṭhāna conditions, and these 24, or if we do not take the same thing again, then how many? 1, 2, 3, 21. So 24 conditions, or say 21 conditions, and these conditions govern all things in the world. All things means both animate and inanimate things, both mind and matter, in living beings as well as things outside. So that is why it is more wide in scope than the dependent origination. Now, dependent origination is for living beings only, but the Paṭṭhāna conditions are for both living beings and non-living things. And it is the explanation of the relationship between the living things and living things and non-living things, both. Now it is important that actually we understand the conditioned states exactly. So what are the conditioning states for, let us say, hetu, and what are the conditioned states for hetu condition? Only then can we understand how things are related. Only then we will be able to explain the relationships between different things. So it is actually important that we know what are the conditioning states and what are the conditioned states for every of these 24 Paṭṭhāna conditions. And actually they are given on the pages with conditioning and conditioned states of 24 conditions. But I don't want to take you through these conditioning and conditioned states because they are too technical. Or you need to be familiar with the past, previous chapters, otherwise you will be lost. So in order to understand this, first make yourself familiar with the previous chapters again. And when you are familiar with the 89 or 121 types of consciousness and their Cetasikas, and then the combination of Cetas and Cetasikas, and also some portions of almost every chapter, then only after that you will study this and then you will understand. So by looking at this, we understand that something is a conditioning state and some other thing is the conditioned state. So, okay, let's have a break.